Spartacus, the slave who changed Roman history forever. Picture this. The year is 73 BCE, and in a gladiator school tucked away in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, a Thracian warrior sits sharpening a stolen kitchen knife. His name is Spartacus, and he's about to do something that will make the masters of the world tremble in their marble halls. Within hours, this man, legally considered nothing more than property, will spark the largest slave rebellion in Roman history, commanding an army that would grow to nearly 120,000 souls and bring the mighty Roman Republic to its knees. But who was this extraordinary man? And how did a gladiator's desperate bid for freedom transform into a revolution that would haunt Roman nightmares for generations, students? The making of a revolutionary Spartacus wasn't born a slave. Historical sources suggest he was originally a Thracian tribesman, possibly even a soldier, from the rugged mountains of what is now Bulgaria. The Romans had a talent for turning their enemies into entertainers, and somewhere along his journey, Spartacus found himself captured, enslaved, and eventually sold to Lentulus Batiatus, owner of a gladiator school in Capua, about 120 miles southeast of Rome. The gladiator schools of ancient Rome were pressure cookers of human misery. These men were trained to kill for the amusement of crowds, living under conditions that would break most spirits. They were fed just enough to maintain their fighting strength, beaten into submission, and forced to face death as entertainment. For most, it was a slow march toward an inevitable bloody end in the arena. But Spartacus was different. Ancient historians describe him as unusually intelligent, charismatic, and possessed of natural leadership qualities that set him apart from his fellow gladiators. Plutarch wrote that he was more Hellenic than Thracian in nature, suggesting he was educated and cultured, a deadly combination in a man with nothing left to lose. The spark that lit the fire. In 73 BCE, Spartacus and approximately 70 fellow gladiators made a decision that would echo through history. Armed with nothing more than kitchen knives and meat cleavers stolen from their school's kitchen, they fought their way out of the gladiator barracks in a desperate break for freedom. It should have been a footnote in history. A small group of escaped slaves quickly recaptured and crucified as an example to others. Instead, it became Rome's worst nightmare. The escaped gladiators fled to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, and here's where Spartacus revealed his genius. Rather than simply running and hiding, he began to organize. Word of the escape spread like wildfire through the countryside, and something remarkable happened. Slaves began to flock to his banner. Not just gladiators, but agricultural slaves, household servants, and anyone who had suffered under Roman bondage. Within months, Spartacus commanded not hundreds but thousands. His army swelled with every Roman defeat, as news of victories attracted more desperate souls seeking freedom. These weren't trained soldiers, they were shepherds, miners, field workers, and domestic servants. Yet under Spartacus's leadership, they began to fight like a professional army. The impossible army. What made Spartacus truly dangerous wasn't just his military skill, it was his ability to forge a disciplined fighting force from the most unlikely material. He organized his growing army along military lines, appointed capable lieutenants like Crixus the Gaul and Oenomaus the German, and most crucially, he maintained strict discipline while offering something no Roman master ever had: respect for human dignity. The rebel army's early victories were nothing short of miraculous. When Gaius Claudius Glaber arrived with 3,000 Roman troops to crush what he assumed was a rabble of runaway slaves, Spartacus outmaneuvered him completely. Trapped on Mount Vesuvius with only one path down, heavily guarded by Roman forces, Spartacus did the impossible. His men wove ropes from wild vines, rappelled down the supposedly impassable cliff face, and attacked the Romans from behind, achieving total victory. This wasn't luck. This was military genius. Rome's growing terror. As news of defeat after defeat reached Rome, something unprecedented happened: panic. The Roman Senate, accustomed to dealing with barbarian tribes and foreign kingdoms, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they had created. One that knew their tactics, spoke their language, and understood their weaknesses intimately. Spartacus's army continued to grow, reaching an estimated 70,000 to 120,000 followers at its peak. They weren't just winning battles, they were winning them decisively, capturing Roman equipment, freeing more slaves, and demonstrating that the natural order Romans took for granted was anything but natural. The psychological impact was devastating. Here was living proof that slaves weren't the subhuman property Romans believed them to be, but people capable of military brilliance, political organization, and effective resistance. Every victory sent shockwaves through Roman society as slave owners across the empire began to look at their human property with new eyes and new fear. The strategic mastermind. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn that reveals Spartacus's true character. Despite commanding the largest slave army in history, despite winning victory after victory against Roman legions, Spartacus didn't march on Rome itself. He had the opportunity, possibly even the capability, to strike at the heart of the empire when it was most vulnerable. Instead, he chose a different path. Historical evidence suggests Spartacus's ultimate goal was never to destroy Rome or establish a slave empire. He wanted something far more profound: freedom. Real freedom, not just for himself but for every soul who had joined his cause. His plan was to lead his followers over the Alps and back to their homelands, where they could live as free people. This decision reveals the moral complexity that made Spartacus such an extraordinary figure. He had the power to inflict terrible vengeance on his oppressors, but he chose the harder path of seeking genuine liberation rather than mere revenge. The beginning of the end. Unfortunately for Spartacus, not all of his followers shared his vision. Some, particularly Crixus and his Gallic contingent, preferred to remain in Italy, raiding and plundering rather than seeking distant freedom. This division would prove fatal to the rebellion. When the Roman Senate finally grasped the true magnitude of the threat, they did what they always did in their darkest hours: they turned to their most ruthless and capable leaders. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest and most ambitious men, was given unprecedented authority and resources to end the rebellion once and for all. Crassus understood that this wasn't just a military campaign, it was a battle for the very foundation of Roman civilization. He brought 8 legions and employed tactics of breathtaking brutality, including the revival of decimation, executing every 10th man in units that showed cowardice, to ensure his own troops feared him more than they feared the slaves. The final stand. The end came in 71 BCE, in the mountains of southern Italy. Trapped between Crassus's forces and the sea, with promised ships from Cilician pirates failing to materialize, Spartacus found himself in an impossible position. But even in defeat, he chose to face his end as he had lived, on his own terms. In the final battle, Spartacus fought with the fury of a man who had tasted freedom and refused to surrender it. Ancient sources describe him cutting down Roman after Roman, desperately trying to reach Crassus himself for a final reckoning. He died as he had lived, fighting, defiant, unbroken. 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies left to rot as a warning to anyone who might dare to dream of freedom. But the warning came too late. The dream had already been planted. The immortal legacy Spartacus changed Roman history not through conquest, but through demonstration. He proved that the foundation of Roman power, the absolute subjugation of human beings, was built on lies. He showed that slaves could think, fight, organize, and lead just as effectively as their masters. Most dangerously of all, he demonstrated that the natural order Romans used to justify their empire was anything but natural. The Roman elite learned from Spartacus, implementing reforms in how slaves were treated and managed. They never again allowed such large concentrations of gladiators in single locations. They developed new strategies for preventing slave revolts and responding to them more quickly. In changing their behavior, they admitted what they could never say aloud. Spartacus had been right. But perhaps most importantly, Spartacus gave the world something it had never seen before: a vision of universal human dignity that transcended race, nationality, and social status. His rebellion wasn't just about escaping bondage. It was about asserting the fundamental truth that all people, regardless of their circumstances, possess an inherent right to freedom. 2,000 years later, that truth continues to inspire those who fight against oppression in all its forms. Spartacus didn't just change Roman history, he changed human history, proving that even in humanity's darkest moments, the light of freedom can never be completely extinguished. The slave who sharpened a kitchen knife in a gladiator school became something far greater than any emperor. He became eternal proof that the human spirit, once awakened to its own dignity, can never truly be enslaved.